There's so much that, we could mine. And as I said at the beginning, often we do this as a 2.5-day workshop to go through all of this material to be able to drill down further. And who knows, maybe sometime in the future we'll do that. The last one that I want to make sure that we get to, and if you pick up the book, which just happens to be for sale, I guess, the Pastoring Multiple Parishes, you'll get much of what I'm going to go through fairly quickly here in this last. But it's, what are the best practices, that people have come up with to help make multiple parish pastoring as life-giving as it can be. So I'm going to plow through those fairly quickly, and hopefully there'll be some time, a little bit of time anyhow, for some questions and answers, or you may have some additional best practices that some of you have discovered, and we'd welcome hearing about those. So we're going to talk about working smarter, about administration and organization, everyone's favorite topic, about inter-parish community building, worship, miscellaneous, which means whatever I feel like talking about that I'm going to add in at the end, and diocesan policies, because this is bigger than just the Archdiocese of Boston, and so there are some policies that dioceses can and have implemented that have made multi-parish pastoring more life-giving and easier to manage. So when we talk about best practices, what we're talking about is how to work smarter. It's really the ability to accomplish more utilizing the same time, talent, energy that you now have. So some of this is kind of a self-analysis of where do I put my time, my talent. Again, if we had more time, we'd do a thing on time management and time analysis. What's the criteria for a best practice? Well, is it life-giving? Is it a structure that facilitates, brings life, versus more complicated and complex and challenging? Does it help avoid unnecessary duplication? Now, the key challenge here is the unnecessary, because some duplication, especially early on in building relationships, is necessary. That's part of that ongoing discernment that you as a leader working with the lay leadership should be constantly looking at and considering. Does it provide the biggest bang for the buck? Time, energy, investment. Here I will share just one personal story that has been haunting me over the last couple of years. I've been a good church bureaucrat for 38 years. That's a long time. I know I don't look that old, but anyway, I have given a lot of talks that are just really nice. But the thing that's going to haunt me, probably when I go before my Maker, is he's going to ask, how many things did I do that changed hearts? It's a good question and a good challenge for all of us in ministry. I think the primary focus of ministry should be about the business of making disciples, not maintaining comfortable cultural Catholics. That's another workshop, but I think it's one of those that we need to think about as we look at making the best use of the gifts of time and talent and treasure that we have, which is basically a stewardship question. Does it reduce complexity? Are we making our lives more miserable by saying yes to everything? How do we make that discernment of what to say yes to, not to? Does it empower? Is it a multiplier ministry? Best example I can give here is that basic part of every pastor's life is visiting the sick and homebound. That's something that's very life-giving for the vast majority of our pastors. Well, when you have one parish certain number of households, you can do a certain amount of that. All of a sudden you have 2 or 3. Now what do? Well, you get into a multiplier ministry. In my diocese, it's called care ministry. We will train staff lay leaders to recruit and train in your parish people who visit the sick, the homebound, hospital. You have those ministries. This is a multiplier ministry versus trying to do it myself. It's the classic, if you have someone who's hungry, you can give them a fish and they eat for a day. Teach them to fish, they can eat for a lifetime. Well, increasingly, as pastor, as leader, how do I multiply my gifts? Through the empowerment, the calling forth of the gifts and talents of others. So, best practices. First one is get a business manager. How many of you have parish business managers? Okay. It's the fastest growing ministry in the Diocese of Green Bay. What do pastors want to get rid of? Business. And there are people, like obviously many of you who are here, who have a gift and have wonderful experience. We need to call it forth, help train it, and form it, because the church isn't a business. Does this sound like a radical thought? I love working with finance councils, and you have that person who stands up and says, well, if this were a business, we'd do some things differently here. Well, it isn't, and we aren't gonna. Right? We are a faith community. There's a whole different set of criteria. Now, that doesn't mean we don't use the tools that the business community provides for us, but they're tools for the mission. They're not ends in themselves. So get a good business manager. Common computer programs. How many of you in multiple parishes have 3 different software packages for your finance and accounting? Standardized, look at your data management, census data. Communications, with email systems, so on and so forth. Common cluster calendar. Critical. How do you assemble that calendar each year? Do you have the staffs from multiple sites come together, to create that early on so that you don't have 3 fundraisers all on the same weekend? And you've all experienced that, and then no one's happy. Or major events on the same time. Build one staff serving from one site. I think that's something to work towards. That may take a couple years. It may mean some people moving on, but work towards that. It's much more effective, efficient. It creates a better support system for the staff itself. Schedule meetings in the same time and the same place. Now that may sound really weird. How does that work? Well, in the Boston model, they're recommending that there's 1 pastoral council and 2 finance councils. I would recommend those 2 finance councils meet at the same place at the same time. The first part of the meeting is together. Common prayer for agenda from the pastor or business manager that pertain to both. And then after that first half hour, they go to opposite ends of the building. They focus on the agenda specific to their parish. And the pastor or business manager is free to wander back and forth. So instead of killing 2 meeting nights, you're only killing 1. I have seen parishes that, in order to diversify its committees, mandate that all parish committees meet on the same night. Then people say, well, but that means Mary can only be on 1 committee. How could the parish possibly survive? Okay, I'm not going to answer that. You know the answer to that. It survives very well. But what you do is the same format. You start with common prayer, common announcements. And then if you have a school religious ed center, they go to different corners of the building to meet, and the staff are free to roam. Some of our parish committees haven't seen a pastor in 20 years. But now they can, even if it's for 15 minutes, just to touch base. And if there's something really hot that needs a little more time, great. Pastor staff then can give it to that extra time. But this way you don't meeting the pastor or leader like yourself to death, which can happen when you especially get to 3, 4, 5 parishes under a single parish pastor. Again, together for prayer, separate. Parish picture albums. If you're going to build relationship, you need to know the faces of people. A thing which can be done at fairly low cost and is something that's always a good reference point for you. Staff meetings. Initially, separate and together. I wouldn't automatically merge the staff right away. I would allow, maybe alternate months, depending on the situation, discern what makes sense. But I wouldn't just automatically push everybody together. Standardize, whether it's bookkeeping, your personnel policies, how do you handle vacations, who gets reimbursed for what mileage, there's a whole series of things, salaries and benefits. This is a big challenge. If the DRE in Parish A is being paid $15,000 a year, and in Parish B they're being paid $40,000 a year, you're going to have some issues. Because one way or another, sooner or later, they will find out. So how do you look at what's right and just and work towards some sort of standard system? Color code contribution envelopes. One of the things that happens when you enter into these partnerships is you change the mass schedule. Biggest challenge. Well, I use the rule of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If your lifestyle in a given weekend is always to go to a 4 o'clock mass, and there no longer is a 4 o'clock mass at your parish, but there is one at the parish you're partnered with, 1/3 of your community are going to go at 4 o'clock because that fits their lifestyle. 1/3 are so deeply committed to your parish that whenever the mass is, that's when they're going to be there. And 1/3 are switch hitters. Depends what's happening that weekend. So what happens is that the question comes up, well, if I throw money in the basket, who gets it? Well, you set up a system saying because of the collaborative, if you put your color-coded envelope in the other's basket, you promise that it'll migrate back to the home parish. Relieves a lot of anxiety. People now become much more comfortable crossing those parish boundaries, and it's a good practice. Start small, find common agenda, achieve small success, then build. Do simple things. Don't create a grand plan of how we're going to come together, everything in the first year. Find something that's going to have a pretty high likelihood of success. Simple things that I've seen are common confirmation retreats, some adult ed things, although that's tough to get people to cross parish boundaries to go to that other place. It takes quite a while to break that down. But find something small and then build on it. I mentioned the common choir. There's just something about choirs, they love the possibility of singing with twice as many voices, and becomes a good thing. Communication. Bulletins, newsletters, balance. Common news and information, and community specific. I find it amazing with some of these partnerships, linkages that we've had, and they say, well, let's just have one bulletin. It's unbelievable what resistance you get because of the loss of the bulletin that's just ours. So if you are going to do a common bulletin, make sure both parishes have their picture on the cover. The first page on the inside is the general messages and announcements, And one page needs to be St. Michael's page, and one page needs to be St. Mary's. But if you just mush them together, there's all kinds of resistance. So again, best practice, take your time in bringing some of those things together. Ministry and leadership training. This is kind of a no-brainer. If you do an annual orientation for people on pastoral councils, finance councils, do them together. What about liturgical ministers? If you have an evening of reflection for ministers of the Eucharist, for a workshop for lectors, do these together. These are simple, and people are very responsive. Catechist training. Can you do that together versus site-specific? Pastoral care visitors, etc. Adult faith formation. Mixed small faith-sharing groups. I mentioned that this morning. Retreats and missions, like Christ Renews His Parish, adult formation. Intergenerational opportunities. These are key. Especially if you can hook the kids, then their parents will come. Especially if the kids are performing. What's the other secret? Food. People come for food. Tack on a program. Okay, and an opportunity to mix people. Now, one of the keys in building relationship is that when people come, purposely mix them up. Otherwise, they will just sit with the people from their parish of origin. Unless you forcefully, but have fun with it. Have them draw numbers out of a hat, and as part of a community building, we're going to encourage everyone to sit at a table with somebody who you didn't walk in the door with. It's one way to help do that superordinate goal kind of strategy versus the big one. Rotate major celebrations. Now, this is tough if you have a large parish and small, because you need the large parish facility. But when you have facilities that are of comparable size, then one year the confirmation is in Parish A, and the next year confirmation is in Parish B for both parishes. You can do that with the Triduum, with Christmas. Who gets the special kiddies mass at 5:30? You take turns. Take turns. What about Lent, Advent penance services? Rotating those between sites. Having a sacristan or liturgy coordinator at each site. This is especially the case when you have small town rural parishes and you have 3 or 4 sites. One of the worst things is Father comes in for Mass and nothing's ready. And so instead of being present to build relationship, he's running around filling cruids and making sure there's hosts and double checking to see if the acolytes showed up. He needs to be free to be present. And likewise, so that he doesn't have to run out the door at the end because he knows he has to be early at the next site, you need the sacristan, someone to have everything set up, ready to go. Inter-parish worship committees. Is it possible to work towards common worship aids if you do those? Another big part of this is the inter-parish choir, use of transition rituals, common worship aids, and songbooks. Now that one may take a while to move towards if you have 2 very different kinds of songbooks. Take your time on that one. But if you can have a common, it's very tough on the celebrants, and priests can verify this for me. If you have 2 or 3 parishes, periodically you lose track of where you are. Is this a church that uses bells or not? Or do the acolytes bring the book, or do I have to motion them over? Or more and quicker you can standardize some of this without damaging the essential identity of the community can be really helpful. Shared youth ministry and young adult programs. These are some of the easier ones Many of our young adults don't have that same commitment to a geographic area. Their primary interest is their peer group. They would like to walk into a church where they're not the only one who doesn't have gray hair. I can see the young adults nodding their head in the room. Okay? The joint confirmation. Here's an interesting one. If a pastor lives in Parish A, have the parish staff be located in Parish B. Why? Because of the future. If everything works out of the same parish, it's a signal to people that you're expendable. You're going to be the next one closed. Whereas if the pastor lives there or the parish is there, the staff, you have a sense that no, we're part of the structure for the long haul. So it minimizes some of the, he obviously likes you best, kind of a thing that parishes can get into. Recruit and train sponsor couples for baptism, marriage prep, but help them prepare people across parish lines. Learn from parents of blended families. If you want a real fascinating evening as parish leaders, invite in all the parents from blended families and ask them for advice. They'll tell you about how, Mary and I fell in love. Our kids never quite made it. Or discipline that's different in one versus the other and how you negotiate those differences. The rituals of Christmas. I grew up in a family that we celebrate Christmas Eve. My wife, it was Christmas Day. So to renegotiate that in terms of the rituals and traditions of this new reality. It's one thing when you have a young couple who are starting from scratch, but when you have established families with kids, then you have a new set of dynamics. And they can teach you a lot. Shared RCIA as, again, a faith-building experience. Create new traditions and events while respecting the old. There are new possibilities. Annual picnics, festival, fun, not fundraisers. Okay? There it is. Something that's fun, that isn't necessarily to build, the parish coffers. A policy. And here we're getting into some diocesan policies. In our diocese, we have a policy that says if you have two parishes, each has a full-time pastor, and you're going to lose one, this isn't a time for the parish to rejoice because they can cut the budget. You must hire somebody on a full-time basis to assist and help the pastor in serving both communities. Now, who it is, that depends on the gifts and talents of the pastor and the needs of the parishes. This is, I think, something that has really been helpful to us. And when hiring, hire the best person possible. I hate to tell you how many pastors I work with, and I say, well, gee, you're having trouble, but did you hire someone? Well, yeah, we hired Mary because she just is good with people. She doesn't have any background or training. But she's a nice person. Okay, so why can't you delegate to this? Well, because she's just nice. She's not competent. You know this story. You've seen this. Okay? You get what you pay for. Weekend priest help-out service. So many of our priests are stretched so thin, they desperately need to have vacations, and those who have gifts to serve in special ministries or with movements, whether it be marriage encounter, Curcio, whatever, they need to be able to get away, and the thing that gets in the way is they can't find help-outs. In our diocese, our vicar for ministers office secretary knows every retired priest in the diocese and what he's doing every weekend. Okay? And it's an invaluable service because we don't want our priests to burn out and crash. And we have some that are incredibly dedicated that only take 4-day vacations because they can't get help outs. It's crazy. So, review your key diocesan guidelines and policies in terms of impact on multiple parish ministry settings. This is, again, scandalous. Most diocesan offices are dysfunctional when it comes to serving especially multiple parish situations. Why? Because each of us have been hired with a very specific expertise, and part of our job description is to get our agenda to happen in the parish. So we put together programs, policies, etc., that have an expectation that the pastor will be part of it. It's not functional. It's not feasible. It's not possible. So there really needs to be a task force in every diocese to take another look at what are the policies and are they life-giving, especially in multi-parish or multicultural situations. Now, that really shakes the tree, but I love doing that. Provide staff to assist with the transitions. Now again, I'm aware that the Archdiocese of Boston has what appears to be a fairly robust training program, which is good. I would hope that they also have a transition program that allows for representatives from the parishes in the collaboratives to talk through and negotiate some of this stuff that we've been going through. Thing like a Mass schedule. It should not just be decided by the pastor and plopped on the parishes. There should be a community or a committee that has a chance to look at the pros and cons, a draft of a proposed or maybe one or two scenarios presented to parishioners who are given an opportunity to react. You are not going to satisfy everyone. What a radical thought. But if you can get a good majority, you're 10 steps ahead than if it just comes from on high. So provide staff to assist. Diocesan staff provide at least some objectivity and can ask the tough questions when you're negotiating these partnerships. Organize peer ministry sharing and support groups. When we do the 2.5-day workshop, one of the things I love to do is to ask all the parish secretaries to gather, all the business people, all the education, all the pastoral, all the pastors, and say, what's working for you? What have you figured out? In a couple of dioceses, they've created their own peer ministries, set up another date to meet, to swap war stories and support one another. Because these are new models, and there's new ways that you have to negotiate these. And your peer group is the most important. Offer continuing ed. I'll come back. I didn't mean to do that, but. So, in summary, and we still have some time left so we can have some discussion and a couple of questions. The key is working smarter. Administration, organization, inter-parish worship, miscellaneous and diocesan. I've given you a couple. You may know of some others. I want to give you about 5 to 7 minutes at your tables to react to some of these ideas. Then we'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll wrap up, and I promise we'll be out of here by 3 o'clock, okay? So at your tables first. All right. It is time for me to call you back again. Anyone have any, we can take 2, 3 quick comments. Father Rip Bob.
When you got the reality that says most priests don't do one parish very well, what are we going to do with 3 parishes, 5 parishes, whatever? Here's my issue. We have to find a way to find a way to make this work. And some of us, I'm a priest, so I can speak about that. I've been a pastor. some parishes are not good at managing people. They are not running, they are not able to do a good job because they just don't do good jobs in these kinds of things. So here we go. So, is this going to be a kind of situation because we are setting the bar so strong in this, maybe the whole system is going to be so significant that we're going to have to change a bigger system about the whole relationship of priest, laity, and staffs and that sort of thing to make this thing work.
Absolutely. Well, maybe a little more specific answer. I couldn't agree with you more. The model of parishes we've known it has got to change and adapt, and we have to figure out better ways to use the gifts of our priests and complement those gifts with other gifts that make for a holistic, life-giving ministry leadership team. Okay? There is no person who's ministerially complete and talented. But together, we can assemble teams that are. And that means a different way of being pastor. It means a different way of being members of parish communities. And that's another workshop. But somebody back here had a comment.
I'm in a parish that I moved to 4 years ago. And one of the things, I was new, and my kids are all grown up, and and I happen to live like a half mile from the church. So I go to church a lot. I didn't necessarily go to church as much before, but I go a lot now. But it's the people that are in the office are so much, to me, the face of the church. It's hard to imagine what will happen. First off, you don't get to see the priest if he's not there that much. And then if you don't have an office staff there, who actually is going to be the face of your church at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, when we talked about staffing and keeping offices open and the issue of presence and building relationship, those are tough things to balance. I wouldn't consolidate things quickly. I would take time, but that staff, even if they are, quote, consolidated at one site, that doesn't mean they aren't going to be present for significant hours in each of the parishes. Okay, you don't want all the activities to happen at that one site. You want to keep that parish community and its identity alive. So you have to balance that. Just to pull everybody out, you're right. There would be a leadership vacuum and a significant problem. So I hope you didn't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that should happen. Yes?
For those of us who are here and are feeling we don't know how to convince our pastor back at home, or even the archdiocesan offices and structures, what do we do? Where do we go?
What you do is model the wonderful things you have learned today. And I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, but I'm also dead serious. You have responsibility for key ministries. You know people who are going through these transitions, these stages, etc. You can minister to them in unique ways. You can enter into discussion with your pastors to talk about some of the things we shared today. Have them look at the videos, since those are going to be online in a month. Invite them to look at new ways of looking. It isn't all going to change or happen right away. If it happens in enough parishes and it's life-giving, it is going to eventually have an impact on the diocesan level. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And there are other dioceses, and again, I don't want to give the impression that the archdiocesan model isn't perfect, because there's a lot of things that they're doing which is right on target and ahead of some other dioceses with some of the training that's being provided. So I think there's hope and there's some openness. I shared a story earlier with, I actually got a call from one of the diocesan offices, and I won't say which one, about 6 months ago, who was meeting with the pastors. And he didn't have a clue how to go into that meeting. I spent about an hour, and he called me back saying, "Oh, thank God you told me all that stuff, because it was a good meeting." Okay, so I think there's hope. I'm a pathological optimist at heart, but I think that's what we're called to be as Christians. Really do. I need to wrap up because I need to make sure you get out of here on time, and I have 2 quotes that I want to share with you as kind of my final comments. And both are from Pope Francis. The first one, quote, "In the life of the church, there are old structures, passing structures. It is necessary to renew them. The church always goes forward, giving space to the Holy Spirit. That renews these structures. Don't be afraid." My last quote, also from Pope Francis. We can ask ourselves this question: am I stuck on a playground, or do I wish to fly high? Am I tied to a herd, blindly doing what everybody else does, seeking only self-satisfaction, focused on myself? Or I look above to fly high. Don't be scared. Dare to have fabulous plans. I encourage you, not be afraid to dream, to have great ideals, to be builders of hope. God be with you, and thanks for coming today.